Stuart Holbrook has spent his life in the world of collectors. As president of Theriault, the world's leader in the auction of antique dolls and figurative art for over 30 years, he's managed the often personal and always wild world of collecting and collectors. His market expertise and knowledge of trends comes to life in The Curious Collector, where he shares his experience and experiences in real-life stories, alongside sage advice on how to build great collections within the happy life of a collector.
Recently, I was talking with you in one of the previous episodes about collecting and travel and how they tend to go hand in hand and can really complement each other. It was interesting. It kind of sparked a thought about this of purpose in travel. And that was my main premise, that purpose in travel really opens up so many doors for you in different destinations as a doll collector. But it led me to think, too, that sometimes having no purpose or direction is a purpose in itself. But how does that relate to collecting? I mean, because collecting, yes, is like traveling in many cases. It's an endless adventure, if you can imagine, of everyday wandering. Instead of to places, you're wandering through history and beautiful objects. And so it led me to think about how collectors evolve and develop over the years in their collecting and what keeps them interested for a lifetime. What really motivates them to this passion far beyond what you might term an instant enthusiasm. And ultimately, it is constantly finding new directions. So as an example, I don't know about you, but I've always had this dream, and I think a lot of people have this as well, of a trip where you literally get in the car with no map, no destination, no idea where you want to go, when you want to be there, or any other plans whatsoever. You just take to the road. This has always been a dream of mine, and I don't know when I'll ever have the time or ability to do anything like this, and most people probably can agree. What a novel idea. Can you imagine? You just head straight down the road, and then you see this little small road turning left, and you're like, I wonder what's down there. So you go and you discover something. And then you, from that road, see a dirt road leading down into a hillside in a valley. And you decide, let's go there. And you find a beautiful little village or some unknown discovery. And every day is something new. Every day is something found, really, found by accident. And this is, I think, parallel to the idea of how collecting can be. Collecting is like, I know you start with an idea, and we've talked about this before. You develop an interest in a particular subject. It could be French fashions. It could be mignonettes. It could be Neapolitan figures. It could be any sort of thing that you latch onto. You saw it in an article. You read about it somewhere. You saw a video on YouTube, whatever, discussing these types of things. You're like, oh, those are really cool. I kind of want to collect that. It all starts there, and it begins to develop. And typically, I think collectors who branch out over time in this endless adventure of the dirt roads and the side roads and the back roads and even the super highways occasionally to really let loose and have fun is a proper way to collect. That means that you start off with Neapolitan creche figures, as an example. You then discover French fashions are really wonderful figurative art as well, and similarly display costumes of that period and show the fashion just like Neapolitans. That leads to costumes themselves, that you become fascinated with historical costumes, and it could be doll size, it could even be larger, which leads to accessories for the dolls, and that may lead to miniature furniture that you can display in vignettes. Then suddenly you realize, well, in America, there was a whole culture of fashion dolls as well, and it may relate somehow to your youth. It could be sissy dolls of the 1950s from Alexander, or it could even be Barbie, which leads to ladies' boudoir items like bathing beauties or Galuba and Hoffman bisque figures, which could then lead to automatons because you dream, I'd like to see a visual movement of my figurative art and my three-dimensional item. And it just goes on from there. It can start in any direction. So the reverse could have happened. You could have started with automatons and finished with Neapolitan creche figures. And in between all of these subjects, all of these items, all of this history, all of the stories you can tell, it just leads to one more. And that is the joy of a lifetime of collecting, because I believe, if my theory is correct, that what the world needs is more passion in their lives, then this is an opportunity for you to have a full life of passion, a full life of adventures, and an endless array of back roads to travel down to build a truly beautiful collection that people will admire. I started thinking about this actually last week when I was recording my previous podcast, because I was talking to the producer who manages all of these podcasts for me and is often sitting back behind headphones and a mixing board in her studio in California. And her name is Tammy Trujillo, and you probably heard her voice on some of the intros. And Tammy is a legendary radio announcer and also podcast producer. But Tammy's a doll collector, which makes it really unique in this, and that I have a producer who understands the subject and can really dig in and talk to me about different things. And so before we started recording last week, she was telling me that she's kind of gotten interested in something new, and she wanted my opinion of what it was like in the collecting world for these items. Now, Tammy is, first of all, I've known Tammy since, I hate to say it, I was a teenager. She's been around collecting as long as I have been around dolls as well. So I've known Tammy for a lot of years. And so always her big focus of collecting has been, through these years, American composition dolls, with a heavy emphasis on F&B historical series. So I was surprised the other day when she asked me my opinion of Nancy Ann's storybook dolls and what the collecting world was like. And I talked to her about how, there's a whole community out there in Nancy Ann. They have a Facebook page. They even have an annual get-together, which I think is up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I mentioned a few names of some people who I know are big in that community. And she's like, oh my gosh, I even know them. So she became interested. And this was fascinating to me to hear her, because we have a collector who spent years in a particular subject and is suddenly thinking, I kind of want to go down this side road. Now, I'm going to throw Tammy under the bus a little bit here, because she knows nothing of what I'm about to do. But as she's sitting in her studio in California, I'm going to call Tammy on here for a quick discussion about this, because I like her perspective as a collector in what led her down. So Tammy, I'm sorry to do this, but I need you to come on the air and talk to me for a moment.
Hi, Stuart.
Hi, Tammy. So
this is strange.
People now can know a little bit the voice, the person behind all of this, and really the genius of the editing and everything with this. So a chance for me to say thank you for everything you've done to help the Curious Collector in this process. But I wanted to ask you about this because it really fascinated me how you wanted to go off in this totally different tangent. What led to this?
Well, it's kind of surprised me too, Stuart, because my gosh, my focus has always been composition dolls. But I started a couple of years ago accidentally discovering things. To take it all the way back to the beginning, I just started doing a search one night on eBay. It was kind of one of those bored in the middle of the night searches for German dolls, because I'm German descent. And I came up with this doll on eBay from a small town called Garmisch-Partenkirchen, from a nightclub that had a skating rink back through World War II and into the 1970s called Casa Carioca. And I thought, what in the world is this? And so, forget about sleeping. I go do the deep dive search. And by the end of the night, I'd bought 3 of them. And yeah. And I'm like, what am I doing? But they're not extremely expensive. And I got them, and I fell in love with these handmade dolls and started doing all this research on Casa Carioca. And for the last 2-3 years, I've been buying items from Casa Carioca, the nightclub, pictures, and of course, the dolls. So that started it. But then another one of these crazy late night, I was watching TV. I was watching AMC. There was a World War II movie on. And I thought, I wonder if they made dolls particular to the war. I knew they did composition ones, so I did a search on that. And I came up with one of the big iconic makeup families of Hollywood are the Westmores. You see the Westmores in every single credit of every movie of the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. They're just everywhere.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. But I had no idea that Betty Westmore, during World War II, started the Dollywood Defense Dolls. And these represent all the different branches of the U.S. service. They're really cute. They're cloth. They come in 12 and 15-inch sizes. And she recruited women around Hollywood and the studios to hand sew these dolls and sell them with the proceeds going to the war effort. That was her contribution. And lo and behold, Ern, another makeup artist from the Westmore family, then decided he would fire off dolls of the Allies. And he created dolls of 11 of our allied countries. Same principle. They're cloth. They're hand sewn by women in the community here in Hollywood and sold for the war effort. So I got going on those. And
you're taking me down some side roads here I never even knew existed. I mean, you're really leading me down these back roads, and I love it. This is what we're talking about. This is incredible.
I haven't given up on my compositions, not at all. But these other dolls I've started collecting as I can find them. And you brought up the Nancy Ann's. Well, that came about because I got a list of the doll shows here in California about 2 weeks ago. I was going through them and marking my calendar so I get to go to the local ones. And I saw, what? A Nancy Ann convention? And I remember early in my collecting, I had a couple of the little bisque Nancy Ann dolls. I thought they were cute. And I thought, but they've become a convention? So off I go to eBay, and holy cow, there they are. That's when I brought it up to you. I said, is this a thing? Well, I'm waiting for my first 3 to come in the mail.
And your new road now.
Yes.
This is incredible. The beauty of it is all these side roads, they're going to lead you back to the main road. And that is your passion will be American composition forever.
Always.
There's no doubt about it. But you're not afraid to take these side roads. And this is exactly what I'm talking about and what makes collecting fresh for you and keeps it interesting and unique. This is a great story, Tammy, and I want to thank you for inspiring me and talking more to collectors about this and your own adventures. Thanks for jumping on here and saying hi to everybody as well. I promise I won't do that to you again, okay?
Somehow I don't trust you on that. But hey, all I can say is there is so much out there. I mean, I've collected 40-some years now. There's so much out there we don't know about yet. We haven't tripped over it yet. Keep on digging because I'm super excited about these new things. So there you go.
That's great. I love it. I love it. Thank you, Tammy.
Sure.
All right, go back into your studio now, and, and I'll continue on from here. So Tammy gives us a really good, I thought that was a very concise and perfect vision of how collecting can diversify, how collecting can be kept fresh is by deep diving, finding new categories, discovering the history of them, and diving in. And again, as I mentioned in talking with Tammy, it doesn't mean you have to leave your current passion, in her case, American composition dolls. It's just a little foray into a back road that keeps everything interesting and gives you a new, fresh perspective and a new vantage point in which to see dolls in many different lights. One California collector, another one that I know who I think just epitomized this from the American perspective is Susan Nunez, who is a legendary collector, one of the great collections of the world by far. I've known Susan now for over 25, probably going on 30 years, and I've watched her collection evolve over this time, and it's been really fascinating to reflect on and watch in the thousands of pieces she's amassed during this time. When I first met Susan, she had recently moved to California from New York and is a fashion designer. And she started off with dabbling in kind of different things in the beginning here, there, but hadn't really found a direction as yet. She liked dolls, she had dolls, and she was trying to kind of find her pace. Well, she discovered automatons, and that was it. She went full in on automatons and became one of the biggest collectors of them for a number of years, and now has a fabulous collection of not only what I would call the classic Relay into Comps or Lambert, which you might recognize more with the Gemot classic bisque heads, but a lot of incredible paper mache, Vichy pieces, very elaborate. She went through it all. But that led eventually to her becoming really fascinated with French fashion dolls. So she went full in on French fashion dolls for quite some time, still is, still enjoying buying those and advancing her collection in different ways by having different variations of them. But she continued on from there because the French fashions naturally look better in vignette settings. So she became really interested in learning more about matrice model furniture, that is tiny little furniture that were probably originally used as models or salesman samples, but happened to fit perfectly in doll size. I joke she has the greatest collection of doll size chandeliers probably in the world because they work so beautifully in vignettes with French fashions. But it goes down to little vases, little pieces that all fit into a vignette, let's call it parlor scene, if you will, with the fashions, which led to a fascination as well with, of course, with the costuming and the accessories that a French fashion might have. And it just went on from there. She branched into English and continental wood dolls, which later led to fascination of European objects in general. She's even recently started delving into German characters because she finds that it's a great side story within her collecting. And then even more recently, that led to Lenchi. And now she's collecting Lenchi. See, it's just a road that you start on, and then you have this great adventure ahead of you if you are willing to sidestep it down the back road, like Susan Nunez, in this process has built an incredible collection. There's another collector that I love in Texas, and I've known him for many, many years. And he's a little bit different in that he doesn't go off these side roads often, but when he does, he goes down that road for a while and he'll drive it for days, in these cases, years, if we're speaking in metaphors. So Rodney Waller originally kind of got interested in dolls through his wife. He's an entrepreneur and in Texas and decided he would help his wife start a doll shop. This was back in the heyday of the old days of your regional doll shop being so important to an area, in this case, Dallas. So his wife opened this doll shop and he became really interested in her business and what people were collecting and became fascinated with the dolls of Madame Alexander. Now, Rodney may not look at the dolls of Alexander necessarily in the same way a classic doll collector might, that is nostalgia to their youth or something along those lines. He became fascinated from a business perspective of how this business was probably the greatest example of the 20th century of a female entrepreneur who became outrageously successful. As well, some of her unique practices and her unique approaches to quality control through the years, from her factory in Harlem, where she would be literally walking down the paths of seamstresses, looking at all of their work and inspecting everything as they were hand making every costume for sissies, as an example. This was really interesting to him. So he began reading more about the research on Alexander and more about her life. And with that, with his wife, began the greatest collection in the world of Madame Alexanders that anyone has ever seen. Now, a lot of those have been sold over the years, but Rodney, being a collector, can't help himself sometimes if he sees a great example. But he's stayed with Alexander's for 30 years. And many of you who attend Madame Alexander doll conventions know Rodney well, not only for his collecting prowess, but his research has been probably some of the greatest research ever done on Alexander as a company. But it doesn't stop there, because some years ago, actually not that long ago, maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago, Rodney became interested in another doll maker. Again, for the same reason. He realized while Alexander did this as a female entrepreneur in America in the 20th century, there was another woman in Germany who did it even before, and that is Marguerite Steiff. And so he became really fascinated with the story of Steiff and Marguerite specifically, and how she developed this company and her practices in business, and what led to a firm that still today is one of the iconic German firms and one of the very few that have survived over multiple generations. So naturally, as Rodney is a collector as well, he began to collect Stipe, teddy bears, animals, even the dolls, and has amassed in just a short period of time one of the greatest collections of Stipe. This is part of the joy. It all started with Alexander, and now it's in Stipe. And then how can I not mention, because I've talked about her before, but Hannah Buktis, who was really, I want to say, the forerunner of this thinking of one thing leads to another. Years before, back in the 1970s, when she began collecting dolls and saw that her process was collect one particular category, go full in on it, learn everything you can, buy all the best examples, and then her tactic was sell the collection and move on to the next one. It was really fascinating knowing Hannah Buktis for all these years to watch this process that she would go through. And that was her way of keeping collecting fresh as well. It was her way of freeing up space in her house when she felt she had reached the end of the road of that particular category or subject. She's like, okay, I've now filled the entire house, so I think I'll move on and sell all of these, free up this space, and start all over again with something else. She would even go off, and this is an interesting discussion in itself, she would even go off into what I would call cross-collecting categories and dabble into it. Sewing items. She actually, during this period, also became fascinated with vintage, and I'm not talking about recent vintage, but 17th, 18th century sewing objects. And she started buying them all over Europe and built one of the great collections. And it was a natural progression from dolls. So sometimes you're collecting that back road or dirt road I talk about that you go down to explore something new may not even be directly within dolls. It may be a fringe category that appeals to doll collectors, has a connection to the story of dolls or to fashion or to something that relates, but it doesn't necessarily mean it is directly dolls. So she went on to sewing items and built a great collection that we actually ended up selling because it was such a great cross collectible that appealed to a lot of doll collectors. Neapolitans she went into, doll houses. And the Neapolitans I mentioned, a lot of people out there will argue, are they a doll? No, they're not a doll necessarily. They're a figurative art piece that's three-dimensional like a doll, but not really a doll. Again, going off into another kind of fringy category. Doll houses, miniatures. She built one of the great collections, French fashion accessories, bébé. She did it all. Go full on, buy the best, develop a great collection. That's it. I feel I've done it. I need space for my next one. Sell them. Let's go. So that's another technique you can have over the years in your process too. One of the big things I think collectors have facing them, and I hear it all the time, is, Stuart, I'm running out of space. And I get that. It's limited. People don't have 20,000 square foot houses like they used to. People have downsized a little bit in their homes, and you might feel like you're running out of space and cabinet space and rooms to be able to put the dolls. Well, Hannah Buktis offers you a solution that people have a hard time realizing sometimes is readily available, in that one collection, if you feel you've reached the end of that road and you want a fresh start in something new and you need room, sell the collection. There's nothing wrong with it. Nobody says that's it. And you can also even just keep pinpointed objects from that collection to represent something from that area that you were once really focused on. Keep just the few best ones, sell the rest, free up space for something new. Sometimes too, these roads can be parallel, like Kewpies as an example. You can find almost parallel roads of which to extend your collecting that really do relate closely. I take Kewpies as a perfect example because there's a number of collectors who specifically focus on Kewpies. And sure, you can spend a lifetime collecting Kewpies and finding different examples that will keep you active. But there's really more if you allow yourself to see beyond it. I mean, just the Rose O'Neill artwork alone, some of her original illustrations and artwork, of course, is the easy, low-hanging fruit of an extension from Cupies. But why not Googlies? Why not comic characters? What about Lenchy fantasy characters like Pan? They all kind of, in my mind, relate very much to the concept and the idea of Cupies. So if the visual of your collection is such that you want the whimsy of Cupies to extend on into other areas, there are opportunities, I think, for every category out there, just like you would see a Cupie. So why? Why, beyond the obvious of the excitement of an unknown journey, would any collector want to do this? Because there must be something more. And I believe absolutely that there are other unique advantages. There are 6 of them I've pinpointed that will help you with realizing the clear advantages this gives you as a collector. The first one, and I talked about this when I did the episode relating to the 10 takeaways from the Rosalie Weil auctions and the things I learned from her and her collection and doing the sales years later, of how it was a really good model, really good data point, if you will, of the advantages of diversifying a collection. So if all of these side roads are side adventures, it's also diversifying your collection naturally, which is offering you opportunities later on when you go to sell your collection to have perhaps better financial results. Now, the caveat I always give is you shouldn't be buying these for investment. And that should be the furthest thing in your mind as to what happens when you sell them from a financial standpoint. Your first goal should be that somebody buys them, that respects them, loves them, enjoys them, and carries on the tradition for generations, and that your name and your contributions into this particular subject or of doll collecting are honored in that regard. But sure, you'd like to see some things do really well. Everybody does. Diversifying your collection and having different items allows you a much better chance because it's inevitable that some things are going to bring a lot less than you paid. You may have bought them at a heated moment in the marketplace, say in 2010, when certain things might have been really hot, other things were not. You were buying them then. And nowadays, they've kind of leveled off a bit. They're less popular. There's not quite a frenzy for that particular category. Well, if that's all you ever bought, if you specifically were focused on that one category, you're in a position where the losses will be more difficult to comprehend. And you will think, well, I failed as a collector. You didn't fail. Please. Never think that, no matter what happens. But if you diversified at some point, so let's take Cupies as an example. Again, if you collected only Cupies and it came to the point that you had to sell your collection, but Cupies were suddenly not quite as popular as they used to be. All of this being hypothetical, of course, you're going to take a significant loss on them, which is fine. You have the joy and the pleasure of collecting over the years. But if you had diversified, let's say if you had let it continue on into Googlies, as I mentioned, or comic characters or Lenchy fantasy pieces, you might find one of those categories actually is really hot right now, much more so than when you bought it. So having this diversification allows you an opportunity to maybe grab onto something when it's time to sell that is hot to make up for the things that may not be. So it's a great financial exercise as well. But look, again, it's not about the money. It really isn't. I think number 2 is one of the key ones in that you're constantly challenged to learn and develop knowledge of areas in dolls that you might otherwise ignore. I mean, Tammy's example and her jumping in earlier and giving us these 3 different genres of dolls that she's sort of deep diving into. This is really fun. Rodney Waller, a few years back, knew nothing about Stipe. Now he's developing and learning an entirely new subject. And this is the joy of passion. This is keeping yourself occupied, your mind curious, your path forward, something that is a great new discovery. that is wonderful for collecting and part of the joy of it. Look, number 3, you're going to have more fun, a lot more fun. You spend, let's call it 20 years in one particular subject, not to pick on Kewpies, but let's take Kewpies as an example. You collect Kewpies full on for 20 years. Trust me, you're going to hit a wall eventually. You're going to get bored because most everything you will have. And if collectors don't have the ability to add to their collection something different, something exciting, the joy of the hunt, if you don't have that, it starts to lose its luster. It starts to lose the energy that drives you forward, which is why I always tell collectors, may you never get all of the dolls of your dreams. May there always be that one doll that you never can find, because that's what keeps you in the game. But with this approach, you are challenging yourself constantly, because you might have most all the rare Kewpies in the world, and it will take years for one to come up that you've never seen or don't have. Well, if you've branched out, you're now onto a different category that's going to keep you occupied while you're waiting for those years to come along, where that one rare Kewpie you can add to your existing Kewpie collection. This is what collecting is all about. I mean, I know a collector in Chicago who I was talking to recently that has allowed herself to branch into a new category. Specifically, she tells me, because I love collecting and I want to keep going. But the problem is, all of my French dolls, I realize I have, over these 30 years in collecting, I pretty much zeroed in on the perfect examples I want for my collection. It's really hard for me to find something new and exciting. And so what she's done actually is branch off into collecting memorabilia from French doll makers of the 19th century. Could be little jewelry or advertisements, or it could be accessories, or it could be recently obtained original booklet or Jameau. These are the things. Now she's really searching and researching and studying the opportunities out there for other items. I mean, my favorite thing, she asked me, Stuart, have you ever seen a Bébé Gourmand biscuit? So the Bébé Gourmand was one of those dolls, that rather interesting doll, where made by Brew, where you dropped a little biscuit in the mouth and it went through these tubes and came out of the bottom of the feet, which I think I've discussed in previous podcasts, and was one of the most ridiculous but fabulous inventions ever created by Brew. But the other day she called me and she asked me, Stuart, have you ever seen a Bébé Gourmand biscuit, the actual biscuit that's supposed to go down through the mouth and out the feet? And I stopped to think, and I thought I had, but then I realized, have I? Or was it just something somebody made for it to be able to use to display how it works? Was there actually an original Brew Bébé Gourmand biscuit that was made? So this has become a quest for her in life now, to find an original Brew Gourmand biscuit. Does it exist? I have absolutely no clue. I've talked to Florence. She's never seen one, doesn't know if it was even made. But yay for this collector for finding something to really latch onto in this pursuit, or the hunt as we call it. The other thing that is great, let's call it number 4, you are going to enter into an entirely new dimension of people and communities and stories in which to embrace. Tammy mentioned when she jumped on to talk about her recent deep diving into Nancy Ann's storybooks, was that she couldn't believe there's a convention, an actual get together of Nancy Ann's storybook collectors out there. And that's really great, because you expand your community when you realize there's others just like me that are interested in Nancy Ann's storybooks. And you're going to meet all sorts of new people and new characters, and have a lot more new stories to embrace in this journey of collecting. Even if it's slightly deviating, there will be an entirely new set of personalities. And it's so easy today to find and meet them because of social media. They don't even have to be in your area. I think number 5, it's a stretch, but I think maybe it isn't. By doing this, by constantly going down these back roads, it really does keep you young. Learning something new is the greatest link to feeling reborn again, kind of a fresh start, kind of like you're young and you're starting all over again. And it feels really refreshing rather than something maybe stagnant that really kind of exposes, wow, I've been collecting, I don't mean to keep picking on Kewpies, I have to stop, but you've been collecting for Kewpies for 25 years. And you say, yeah, I've been collecting these Kewpies for 25 years. Well, now you kind of stop and think, oh man, I've been doing this for a long time. I'm old. No, start something new. Be young. Say, I just started this collection. People ask me all the time, how does Florence, my mother, do what she does at 83 years old with all the cataloging, with all of the research, with all of the work she does every day, the videos, 7 days a week, 9, 10 hours a day. And I tell them, you know why? Because she's curious. She never stops closing the door to ideas or concepts that are fresh. She's always wandering within her mind into new areas and often saying to me, I learn something new in this job every single day. That keeps you young, essentially. That keeps you going. So consider that, if anything else, as just something new to explore and to feel reborn again, to learn something new every day. Number 6, the final one, and I've talked about this as well in previous podcasts, but showing how it relates to this concept in that you really increase the odds of appealing or attracting family support to your collecting if you go off in some other directions. And the reason being that your, let's call it hypothetically, your husband may not necessarily relate to a French fashion or a French bébé. It doesn't connect visually to him unless, of course, you want to go deep into the stories, which will help him relate a little bit more, finding things in his own life that may connect him to the story of the French doll, whether it's business of the French dolls, whether it's the sculptors that created them, whether it's the fashion designers that made the costume. That may work. But you might find that there's a way that you can branch your collecting out into a subject that you love that is a natural instant hit with this hypothetical husband. One category, automatons. There's nothing that draws in the male eye to a piece of figurative art or a three-dimensional human figure than movements and mechanics. And this is a great one. Gail Cook, the great collector in Dallas, for years wanted to kind of bring her husband into the idea of having fun with her collecting alongside her. And at first it was hitting a wall because he was collecting things like Rolex watches and cars. So Gail had this genius of seeing, well, I'd like to have him kind of understand my collecting more. What can I buy? Automatons, natural. And she added a number of different automatons to lure Dan Cook, her husband, and show him how they can connect to the things he loved, which all related to mechanics like watches and cars. And he then became really fascinated with the whole hobby, the collecting, and became far more supportive to her building this great collection that she did. I'm going to say it again. I'm going to say it over and over. Having family support, whether a spouse or children or sisters and brothers, whoever, people that regularly come to your home, that see your collection, having their validation and understanding it is an incredible tool for collectors to have to keep pushing on. So if you diversify your collection, if you have other objects, you're increasing your odds and chances of finding a particular category that appeals to one of these family members that they can relate to, that will overall help you in the explanation of the entire hobby and what you are doing and what you are building here. This is a really critical, I think, approach to one of the benefits of diversification and letting yourself go down the back roads. Collecting is ultimately one of life's greatest journeys. And if one of life's greatest dreams of a journey is to just take 2 steps with no knowledge of where you're going, learning along the way, meeting new people in the process, and discovering things not only that you love, but about yourself, then this is the ultimate trip you can be going on. Just take 2 steps. Take 2 steps more. Keep going. Keep walking down that road, and then look for another road. Look for the side road. Look for the dirt road. Look for the places that are not obvious, but branch off from one road to another and then another. Keep going. You're going to make mistakes. Some of them might, you could get a flat tire, but that's okay. You can fix the flat tire. You can turn around and go back and then find another one. And it will keep you always occupied, keep you always excited, keep you moving forward to this ultimate goal of that happy life of a collector. So enjoy this journey. Keep looking around. Keep being curious.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Curious Collector. The Curious Collector is hosted by Stuart Holbrook and produced by Tammy Trujillo. We invite you to follow us on social media and feel free to leave any questions you have for Stuart on Facebook at Stuart Holbrook-Theriault or follow the Theriault Company Facebook page. And you can stay up to date with the latest auctions and events at Theriaults.com. We'll talk to you on the next episode of The Curious Collector.